Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity.
Well, today I'm joined in BIM Thoughts land by Dana DeFilippi and Carl Storms. Of course, Dana and Carl are here. But we also have Bradley Clark joining us today. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff with Bradley. How the heck are you, Bradley?
I'm doing well.
Good. So here you go. Define yourself.
Oh, man.
You knew it was coming.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Went to school at the University of Idaho. My undergrad is in virtual technology and design. So that's 3D modeling, animations, and simulations is what we mainly focused on. My master's was in architecture, and then pursued my PhD in education, focused on educational technologies. And from there, I ended up going over to Washington State University, and I was their educational technology researcher. So any new or upcoming kind of educational technologies, I would do research and work with faculty to figure out how best to improve student engagement with technology. And in 2016, Clark Construction started building a new building on the Washington State University campus, and I helped with some of the design of those classrooms. The building was actually focused around educational technologies. So all of the classrooms there, the designs were focused around the technology itself rather than trying to retrofit spaces. Shortly after that, I became the coordinator for the building and helped with some of the commissioning and closeout of the building. And for about a year and a half, I was a building coordinator. And then after that, Clark poached me and pulled me over to Seattle. And I started helping them in VDC for the SeaTac International Arrivals Facility expansion of the SeaTac Airport. During my time at Clark, I was everything from a VDC engineer all the way up to a senior VDC manager. For a while, they asked me to kind of go around and help out on projects that were running into issues with scheduling and making sure that everything was getting coordinated ahead of time. So they send me down to California for a couple days a week and help out getting some projects turned around. And then I was also the regional VDC manager for Seattle and oversaw everything for the San Francisco region as well.
Wow. Look at you. You were prepared. So what softwares do you use? What's your big three?
Big three. I mean, I would say Synchro, Navisworks, and Revit would be my top three.
All right. I don't know what Synchro is.
Synchro is a 4D simulation software.
Oh, okay. So it's scheduling.
Yep.
Oh, Navisworks. And Revit. Everybody knows Revit. If you don't know Revit, what the heck are you listening to this podcast for?
What are you doing in construction?
Yeah, really. Wow. So you do the scheduling stuff, and you figure out where the heck the stuff is and where it needs to go.
Yeah, help out with some of that.
And then
lots of coordination.
And when you worked at the university, did you do the same thing there, or were you?
I did not actually. Have a little bit of history of working in construction, growing up and everything, but the thing that was the most appealing to me of coming over and being a VDC manager is really the problem solving.
Yeah.
And those constant day-to-day complex problems that come up and figuring out who are the right people that you need to reach out to and get into the room to come to the right conclusion.
Right. Well, that's always hard to do.
Yep.
But once you find them and you know who to ask for, then it becomes easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's the biggest challenge you wish architects would figure out to make your life easier?
Probably finishing design before construction starts.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
But is that really an architecture issue or is that an owner issue? we want it yesterday?
I would say it's a combination of both.
I'll give you that.
I've been on a few projects where, you get to 100% CDs, contract documents, and the owner is more or less happy with all of those. But you end up finding that as the architects start going through the drawings and through the models and looking at things, they see some things that they think that they could refine and improve upon, rather than just saying, we gave the owner exactly what it is that they wanted, and let's call it good.
Right. Or the owner sees it finally being built and gets a walk into the space and says, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
That definitely happens.
This is a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
We had a client one time working in the casino industry, walked into a finished Italian restaurant, walked in, looked around, walked out and says, I don't like it. It doesn't go with the rest of the casino. Tear it out.
Oh, no.
And so that was a big change order.
I mean, I guess if you've got the money for it, then I guess you could do that. But.
Yeah. He was, afterwards, he says, I realize I approved everything and I really like the design, but it doesn't go with everything else. So tear it out.
Should have thought of that before you let him build it.
It's a beautiful restaurant, but it doesn't go. All right. Well, it's gone. I think they had like all the tables and everything in it ready to go.
Oh, wow.
Time, yeah. It's pretty interesting. So, yeah, that was fun. So, yeah, I can completely understand that challenge. I think architects had that same challenge too, where they're like, we're in construction, we got to stop design.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then engineers, they probably have a completely different problem.
Oh, absolutely.
So what's the big problem with engineers?
I think I don't necessarily say, I wouldn't say that it's a problem that they contribute to. I would say the biggest problem that they run into is last minute changes.
Yeah.
To some designs, and they have to do a lot of last minute rework, or like at CTAC on that project, they ran into a problem where it's because it's an expansion of it. They're tying into an existing building. Well, the problem was the engineers didn't realize that that gap between the two buildings was actually an enclosed space, and so they actually had their systems designed to exhaust into that space.
Yeah,
because
that wouldn't work.
No, so they ended up having to build what they called a coffin, and they had to excavate a bunch out and tie into the basement of the existing building and reroute a bunch of utilities that way.
Yeah, well, I guess that would work for a few minutes, though.
Yeah, for a bit till people started getting lightheaded and everything started seeping back into the building.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. Yeah, Dana, I'm sure you're itching for a question.
Yeah, I totally have a question. Well, you said that you typically are interfacing with Navisworks. What is the typical protocol with that? Are you finding that you're coordinating these types of issues throughout the duration of the design, or is it mostly during the latter part of construction documentation? Or, how would you see that Navisworks is coming into play?
It's a majority of it is through the latter part of design, but it's typically best practice to try to do some initial clashing early on, especially with site work and utilities and looking at foundations and really making sure that you're not going to run into any existing utilities with any of your footings or slabs, so that you can plan around a lot of that. Also looking at some of the core and shell with new structure, and really looking at how things are going to tie into any existing buildings if you have a project that's set up that way. But then when you get later into coordination, then I typically start, from the ground up, work your way up the floors. If the building is a pretty significant size, then we'll break it up into grids. And, like for CTAC, we had it broken up into 4 different areas. So you go areas 1 through 4 on the ground floor and then work your way up.
That was actually my next question. So it's typically by level, but maybe you break it up by quadrants based off of the size or scale of the actual building itself.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't want to end up trying to tackle too much at once, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're capturing a large enough area that you're looking at a majority of a system or an area that you're going through, because you don't want to look at a small space. Like if you went room by room and tried to coordinate something, and then you jump over to the next room when you're done with that, and you realize that the routing you had done isn't going to work for the next space. And so, like, as you're coordinating an area, you always want to make sure that you're looking at the areas that are tying into that to make sure that any adjustments you're looking to make are going to work there as well.
And how often do those meetings typically go on? I mean, would you say that they're bi-weekly, for an hour, 2 hours, or do you invite all disciplines? What's the typical protocol on that?
So that depends on who you talk to. I am not one that likes spending a ton of time in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I typically like to run through a majority of the big issues during meetings, and then kick everybody out to where they can go and focus on solving those problems. And then you assign classes out for smaller issues and let them work on it in their own time. Most of the time, I try to run coordination 2 days a week, like Tuesdays and Thursdays for an hour each day. If we're getting closer to like when you're going to sign off an area, there are times that we'll bump that up to an hour or 2 hours for one of the days out of the week. But for the most part, I always try to keep it within an hour. There are people that I know that, like when I first came onto the CTAC project, it was run by another person at Clark, and they were doing 6-hour meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oof.
And you basically sit everybody in the room. It's all the trades, and you go through every single issue that you have on the list. And I think that really just hinders a lot of the work that everybody's trying to get done.
Are they working meetings at least? Like, can you bring your laptop and be working
Yep.
on the issues?
Everybody,
So that at least,
brings, yeah,
is more efficient.
everybody brings them, but I mean, you always end up getting these random questions or comments during those meetings, and it pulls everybody's attention away from that. It just ends up eating up a ton of time. So I like to just stick to really big issues that are interdisciplinary. So if it's going to take more than just the plumbing guy to solve the issue or just the drywall guy to solve the issue, I try to focus on those issues in the meetings. And then anything that can be handled by just a single trade, I'll save those clashes out and email them out to everybody so that they can work on those on their own time.
And are you relying on the architectural or other discipline, models, Revit models for the clashes, or are you creating anything in Revit, your team specifically for the building model for clashes?
No, so it's all of the trades and design models that we run classes with. So we take the architect's model. Depending on the phase of the project, we'll grab the engineer's models for the MEP systems and pull those in, and we'll run clash detection, figure out where any issues are. But as you get further along into the construction or getting closer to the construction phase, we start pulling in the subcontractor models because they have a lot more detail in them, right? So they're going to have hangers, unistrut, all their joints and pieces basically broken out, so you can start to see what's actually going to be installed out there, and you can start to see more of the smaller issues.
What about laser scanning?
Laser scanning. So we do a fair amount of that, but I think there's a point, and there's a time and place for when to do laser scanning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could go in and start laser scanning every building and get everything captured. But I think there's a point where it's just too much information you're not going to end up using. Mm-hmm. One point where we used a lot of laser scanning, especially on the CTAC project, was there's actually a pedestrian bridge that spans from one building to another, and it's about 900 feet long. Mm. But the center section of that building, it spans over the airplane taxiway. So as planes land and they go to park at their gates, there's a taxi lane that goes right underneath that bridge. So that section of the bridge couldn't be constructed in place. So it was actually built out in one of the cargo areas, and then it was trucked in and then erected up into place with these, they're called strand jacks, but they're basically cranes that just lift it vertically. But the problem was where those the two end pieces that were built in place, because you're lifting a piece up into place between those two, you have to make sure that the gap between those is just right? You can't have it too big of a gap and you can't have it too tight. And so they went through and did laser scanning as that center section was being built, right? Because with that structure, as you started adding more weight on it, right? So it starts out with just steel. And then as you start adding in the concrete and the exterior panels and the MEP systems in there, it's going to start to sag more like in the middle.
Right.
They try to build camber into that to make sure that it doesn't end up bowing too much in it. So they had to do a lot of constant checks to make sure that they were within tolerances of settlement. And so they went through and did a lot of laser scanning throughout specific phases of the construction to make sure that they were within tolerance as they were going along. And it was a huge success. So we didn't have to do any major modifications or adjustments to either of those end pieces to make sure that that thing was going to fit. So once they got it connected to the jacks, I think it only took about an hour and a half to get it erected up into place.
Wow. That was a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot could go wrong.
Yep. Yeah. So I think laser scanning is a great tool for, whether you're looking at tying into existing conditions and getting a clear picture of that, right? Because a lot of times with existing buildings, you have a lot of older drawings that are outdated and probably not quite as accurate as they are by today's standards. So it gives you a much clearer picture of what you're working.
Do you find yourself or your company redrawing the building in Revit as it's being built for the as-built, or
typically not?
Typically not. Okay.
Typically no. So the way that we try to set up most of the contracts is for the building itself, for architectural. It's the architect's responsibility to update their models to meet as-built conditions. And it's typically the subcontractors or the trades that end up updating their models to reflect as-built conditions, right? Because they'll get a bunch of red line drawings and updates from the field, and they'll take those and update their models accordingly.
Is that as hard as it seems to get those final models?
It can be. The way that I typically try to do it is, rather than have them hold off until the very end to go through and start doing those updates, I try to do like bi-weekly check-ins, so every 2 weeks or every month, and just check in with them and see like, hey, have you guys got any new drawings from the field to go through and update those? If not, then I can check with the PM and make sure that we get those over to you guys so that you're not handed a stack of drawings that you're expected to go through, and get those to us last minute, and it's a mad dash for you guys to make sure you get everything addressed.
Carl, you've been quiet.
That's how I like it. Nice and quiet.
No, we need to hear from Carl. Carl's always got good questions.
Well, I have a couple questions. The first one is, I heard from a little birdie, Brad, that you've made use of BIMTrack in a couple of your projects.
Yes, I have. Very useful tool. I really enjoy using BIMTrack, especially on the smaller projects. And when I say smaller projects, I would say like under 500 million for the scope of the project. It's a really convenient and useful tool for being able to identify and track changes, but it's also really nice because it's integrated with AutoCAD and Revit. So you can go into Navisworks during meetings or while you're running clashes and push out new issues, and you can assign them to people that are on your project. So I can assign issues to the architect. And rather than having them go into Navisworks and look at that issue and then try to find that in Revit, you can actually pull up that issue with their tool and it'll take you right to the same location as where you're looking at in Navisworks. So there's a lot less hunting around for that, and that goes for all of the trades. Also have been starting to use their functionality to where if you go into clash detection in Navisworks and you generate all these issues, BIMTrack will actually take those and publish them automatically into their platform to where you don't have to do it manually, which is a huge time saver for you.
Absolutely. Because you mentioned AutoCAD and you mentioned Revit, which it absolutely does tie in with both. How are you managing the coordinate system to make sure everybody is playing on the same field? Is it just as easy as when you have that first meeting? It's thou shall use this coordinate system, or do you have some other tricks to make sure everybody plays ball correctly?
No, I mean, typically in our BIM execution plan, like we do a really good job of identifying what the coordinate system is going to be, which coordinate system is going to be used, what model it's actually going to be hosted out of, and just to provide a lot of clear details. There's every once in a while, it seems like the biggest culprit that we run into issues with is with our miscellaneous metals subcontractor working in CAD. And getting some of their models to align, but a lot of times it's just pulling them into Revit and figuring out how we can get them readjusted and aligned to pull into place.
What is the miscellaneous metals subcontractor? Okay,
so it kind of depends on the project and what you're going to classify as miscellaneous metals, but a lot of times it's like metal stairs. It can be handrails. It can be metal supports. So like any overhead supports for like bathroom stalls and things. Anything that's not like structural steel that's holding up the building that's on the project, that's typically what falls into the category of miscellaneous metals.
Okay. Learned something today. Isn't that something?
It's a good day when you get to learn something.
It is a good day when you learn what miscellaneous metal contractor is.
It's different than mistletoe, Bill. It's different than mistletoe.
It's a lot different than mistletoe, and I apologize to all the miscellaneous metal contractors out there to listen to BIM Thought. I'm sure there's at least a half, or a full one.
And that's a perfect segue. Perfect.
Yes.
Segue, Bill. I couldn't have asked for a better one.
Hey, you're welcome.
To my my next question. So with the year that's been 2020, we're getting near the end. What do you think is the next great technology in the BIM VDC space? Software, technology, platform, whatever you think might be helpful coming, 2021, 2022.
Oh man.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I mean, there's a lot of great technologies that are out there right now that the biggest thing is just refining them and refining some of the processes and functionality behind them. I would say one thing that I would like to see out of the industry to really improve some of the coordination workflows is inside Navisworks, when you generate clashes in clash detection, it automatically generates viewpoints for those spaces. And what myself and a lot of other people at Clark end up doing anyway is oftentimes those views are really tough for you to figure out where exactly you are in the building in relation to everything else. And so you end up spending a lot of time during meetings when you pull up these issues, all the subs are asking, like, where are we at in the building? And so you end up having to zoom out, let them find their bearings, and then you zoom back in and focus on the issue. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but over time it really adds up. So we end up having to go through and we orient all of the views to face a specific direction. And we typically do it top down to where you can see like 2 to 4 grid lines to where you can get your bearings in the building. And then you update the view for those issues. But it would be extremely beneficial to be able to tell the clash detective or whatever add-on that you're using to generate clashes, to generate viewpoints with a top-down view, and to have the camera set a specific distance from each of the clashes. And I mean, I would say it would save 5 to 6 hours a week worth of time out of running coordination.
Yeah, and that's 5 or 6 wasted hours.
Yeah, Exactly. I mean, it's really just us going through and spending the time
Yeah.
refining that to save time for everybody else that's going through these issues.
Or even a command that would just zoom out a whole bunch and then zoom
Yeah.
right back into where you were. So you
Yep.
could just hit one button to say, take me out. And you can say, okay, now zoom me in. And even if it animated, it would save you some time. Everybody would understand where the heck you are.
Yep.
That to me would be an easy fix that Autodesk could do.
Oh, yes. We've asked.
It would be nice to just see any development in Navisworks. Any.
Yes.
It's such a great product that they've just let wither on the vine. I mean,
Well,
they
what the
haven't done
heck?
anything since 2013, aside from adding in the ability to talk to BIM 360, and that was just a button.
We're going to have to get a Navis worker.
A Navisworks, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be great. I mean, because they have that exact functionality that you mentioned, Bill, when it comes to clashes. You can animate moving from one clash to another.
Right.
So, I mean, the functionality, we know that it works.
Right. We just want to
Moving.
zoom out to a known point and zoom back in.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
What about robotics? Are you guys finding any use for that technology?
Yeah, a little bit. One of the things that I want to say it's in Irvine, one of our projects, was able to get one of those Spot the robot.
Yes. We had Brian on from Boston Dynamics a few months ago.
We
Cool
did.
device.
Yeah, so they were able to mount a laser scanner to it and have it automated to go around and do scans of the building for it. And I think it's a great tool. Being able to set up and do a lot of automation for that, and instead of having to send somebody around, every week or every month that you want to do scans, you can just set that up and have it run, whether it's on the weekend or after hours or anything, and you're not getting in anybody's way. I think it's a very useful tool to really help automate a lot of the processes that people end up spending a lot of time doing.
Yeah. I could see Spot being useful in that for even going around and just grabbing photographs of known waypoints or points in the building during construction.
Yeah. And another thing that we do on a lot of other projects is for tracking progress, and also QA/QC is doing 360 photos
Right.
of cases as well, so you can track the progress. You can, if you have any potential issues, you can look back in time.
That would be cool.
When those are taken. But you can do the same thing with Spot, is set up a 360 camera and go through and take those pictures as well.
That would be really neat to have a 360 camera and a way to go and say, okay, I want to stand here in the building and then look at it in a time lapse to see what was done during that week or that month. Yeah. That's cool. That would be fun to do.
Are you guys utilizing any ARVR technology, especially now with everybody kind of being remote or not really being able to be in the same room?
Yeah, we do. We do a fair amount with virtual mock-ups, and as we get closer or further along in design of the building, we'll set up. We do both AR and VR. We do a lot of it down in the San Francisco region with augmented reality, but getting everybody to be able to hop into the building and kind of have like some more spatial awareness of the spaces. I mean, you guys talked earlier about that Italian restaurant in the casino, and it not being what they thought it was, or talking about spaces looking smaller than what they thought they were going to be. Like, it's a very useful tool that before anything is actually built, you can throw on a headset and really get a sense of the space and the size of it, and some of the lighting as well, to really figure out if this is the direction that you want to continue to move forward with for the design and the construction of it, or if there's any changes that you want to make.
Absolutely. What the armadillo does.
Are you assigning people their own headset, or how are you guys handling that?
No, so it's typically like we'll have one in one of our offices, and we'll do it during like either a stakeholder meeting, or we'll set up a separate meeting where people can come in and do it. And there's also times and some projects where we just leave a headset on site and a system to where you can have anybody come in at any point, and we can load up the models and run them through it.
Are you using any of these? You mentioned you guys are doing a lot of stuff with Synchro. I know they're trying really hard in the AR space, or are really well in the AR space. Are you taking advantage of that platform?
We really haven't yet. I know. I think back in September we were looking at diving into that a little bit. They also picked up like a couple of their remotes that allows you to easily like pan back and forth along the schedule and change the views of what you're actually looking at in the space. But we hadn't really pushed it far enough to really look at any of the AR functionality of it.
Cool enough. I think they're working with Tremble and with Microsoft to work on the HoloLens too. So that's a little more. I don't know if I want to say expensive, but we were talking a couple episodes ago about getting into VR. Where you're spending $300 on a headset. You're still probably $2,500 for an AR or HoloLens. So you want to make sure you're getting value of it before you start leaving those on the site.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, luckily the technology is such that you can use your phone, you can use your tablet, you can use your laptop. I mean, you don't necessarily get the same experience, but you can still have that conference room setting and see, where people are looking, and especially in the virtual atmosphere, and being that we're all socially distant and in different rooms and different buildings, what have you. Being able to do that remotely in the same virtual space is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So what would you say a typical day is like for you? Do you have a typical day?
Oh, they all vary. There's a lot of times you end up getting one-off calls with requests for trying to look into any issues that the field's running into. Fair amount of meetings, everything from coordination to like national level meetings where we're talking about standards and procedures and trying to get everybody aligned, starting up new projects. I'm typically in the past have never really been just like on a single project and focused on that. It's typically been a couple of them, so they're all in different phases. So there's like a new behavioral health hospital that University of Washington's building. So getting that ramped up, looking through the BIM execution plan with all the trades and the designers to get that all nailed down. But yeah, a lot of times it's just a lot of phone calls with either the field or other people in the office, just trying to look at any potential issues that are going to come up on site or anything that's going to happen down the road, and just trying to stay ahead of things for the most part.
Do you use any computational tools, Dynamo, anything, Grasshopper, any generative design?
I don't personally, but at Clark we have a handful of people that write a lot of Dynamo scripts to automate a lot of processes for us. So thankfully I have not had to dive into that too much. Coding is definitely not my strong suit, and I know that the Dynamo is more node based, and a little bit quite a bit easier to use than to try to hand code things. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to not have to really dive into that. But it is a very powerful tool, and it has a lot of potential for being able to streamline a lot of the processes. Like one of the really cool things that a couple of the guys at Clark did was they're able to go through and automatically generate king studs in the building based off of door locations and corner locations. So rather than trying to have the designer do that, the architect do that, or the drywall framer, having to wait for them to get on board the project, it goes through and automatically populates that for us, so we can start running clashes earlier and make sure that any of our MEP systems aren't running through any of those troublesome areas, and get those routing fixed early on.
Carl, I'm going to give you the honors of final thoughts.
Final thoughts. That is.
We're already at an Aubin.
We are. Where does time go when you're having fun talking about ConTech? What about 3D printing? Do you guys use any of that? Or play with 3D printing at all?
Yeah, so I did a fair amount of 3D printing while I was at Washington State University, and when I first started at Clark, there were a couple people that were trying to dive into that as well. I think it's really useful for being able to quickly generate some prototype designs of buildings and trying to get an idea of the structure and everything. But I think with all of the technology with AR and VR, coming out and really getting refined a lot over these last few years and even the next year or two, I really have a hard time seeing that as a tool that should be heavily invested into compared to some of those other solutions.
Yeah, because it's not really made yet for making things to put in the building.
Yeah, and I know a couple subcontractors and even some self-perform GCs that use 3D printing for some of the components that they actually end up installing. So there was an electrical sub that had some brackets that they used to hold some cabling and some conduit together, and they actually found it had to be modified from what they could find, off the shelf. And there was like one person that manufactured something similar, but the prices were so expensive that they found that, they could go through and 3D print all of these for so much cheaper.
Wow.
So in that regard, if you're looking at it from a constructability standpoint, I think it's a very useful tool. And there's a lot of potential there.
I absolutely agree. And I think that there's so many little things that you would never think of, like you wouldn't go out and buy a 3D printer for X, but once you have one for the major reasons that you got one, becomes like an everyday tool for just little odds and ends that you can do to get you through to that next point.
Yep, absolutely.
I use mine all the time, but I'm not building buildings.
What do you build?
I have a rover that is stalled in development, like a Mars rover. I do a bunch of restoration of toys, and so I build
Very
the
cool.
little parts that I can no longer find for those vintage toys with the 3D printers, both the filament type and the resin type.
Very
I
cool.
will say, if you are getting into 3D printing, start with the filament type.
Yes.
The resin type is just, I have a lot of things I want to print with it right now, but I just don't want to go through the hassle of cleaning it.
Yeah.
Because it's a pain in the ass.
It is a lot of work.
And it's toxic.
Yep.
If it wasn't toxic, it wouldn't be so bad. But the stuff is, you don't want to touch it. And you go through like a half a roll of paper towels, it seems like, when you're cleaning this thing up. Because as soon as you touch something, then it's contaminated, and it's like, crap, now I have to wash my gloves, grab some more paper towel. It's a pain. But maybe I'm overthinking it, but who knows?
Bill, it really sounds like this is a great opportunity for you to get an intern.
Yeah.
Nice.
Or just have someone else print it for me and send it. But yeah, I use the 3D printer for that. I'm looking at a bunch of things on my IKEA pegboard that I've 3D printed to hold all my tools.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's fun for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But sure does take a lot longer than you think it's going to take to print, as Carl can attest to.
It does.
It's like, oh, we'll just whip one of these out. Oh, 16 hours later,
Yeah.
we ran out of filament. We got to do it again.
Yeah. And hopefully the print doesn't fail about 10 hours in.
Right. I have learned an important lesson with that, which is don't print a bunch of parts at the same time on a filament printer. Print them one at a time.
Yes.
Because it does, even though it takes longer, you get it done quicker.
Yep.
But on the resin printer, you just throw them all in and go.
Yeah.
The more you can put in, the better.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. Less cleanup.
Well, less cleanup, and it doesn't take any longer.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And what's interesting is when I first got the resin printer, is back at AU a long time ago when Autodesk introduced that 3D printer that everyone went to go look at and was like, God, it's so expensive and it prints so small. Well, it's the resin printers that we have today that are $300 and the same thing. So it was quite interesting how that has gone from Autodesk, and I don't know if Autodesk even developed it all as their thing or not. But
Yeah, I don't know.
It went open source, and then they stopped developing it, and now, like you say, if you look at any other 3D printers of that type, it's basically that because it's open source. Anyone can use it.
Yeah, anyone can use it. So maybe Autodesk did develop it. Who knows?
They got out of the business, but they got far enough along that it's become kind of, well, as you see.
Yeah. I mean, you can get them now for $200.
Yeah, they're really cheap now.
They're really cheap, and boy, resin stinks too. To high heaven. Yeah, but yeah, it's fun. That's what I use my 3D printer for. All right. Well, Bradley, it's been a lot of fun. I have learned a few things on this BIM Thoughts. I'm sure everyone else has as well. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
It's always fun to talk to anybody who wants to talk to us, really. But it's fun to talk to people that are in the industry and solving difficult problems every day.
Yeah.